Welcome to the Thought Collective, where we explore the events shaping our world today through diverse perspectives and thoughtful analysis. We bring you conversations that matter. This podcast series is produced by UN Karmavir Chakra winner, Aditya Bosu. Join the community at adityabosu.com, where you'll find more insights and analysis, as well as the complete archive of our articles and podcasts. The Thought Collective, some perspectives on the events that are shaping the world today. Today's episode is
The Price of Conflict, Arms Industry Windfalls and Economic Realities in the Shadow of the Ukraine War. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia in February 2022 represents more than a brutal military confrontation. It marks a profound geopolitical rupture, unleashing immense human suffering and triggering economic shockwaves felt across the globe. Beyond the immediate tragedy, the conflict has acted as a powerful, if grim, catalyst for the global arms industry. Historically, war fuels demand for weaponry, enriching manufacturers and reshaping international trade dynamics. This podcast episode delves into the multifaceted impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on the international arms sector, examining shifts in manufacturing, trade patterns, and the financial performance of defense corporations across domains from traditional land armaments to emerging drone technologies. It scrutinizes the complex web of arms flows to both Ukraine and Russia, distinguishing between government aid and commercial sales, and identifying key national and corporate players. A central focus is the economic equation for major supplier nations, particularly the United States, weighing the financial windfalls for defense contractors against broader fiscal costs and benefits. This is sharply contrasted with the devastating economic price borne by the direct belligerents, Ukraine and Russia, encompassing staggering military expenditures, infrastructure destruction, crippling sanctions, and profound humanitarian costs. Through a cost-benefit lens, the analysis weighs the profits accruing to a select industry against the widespread economic hardship generated by the conflict. Finally, drawing on expert analyses, this podcast episode explores the potential long-term geopolitical, economic, and security implications stemming from the war and the associated proliferation of arms, assessing the enduring impact on regional and global stability. This investigation seeks to illuminate the intricate, often discomforting interplay between modern warfare, the global arms trade, and the international economy, identifying the winners and losers in a conflict actively reshaping the 21st century landscape. Reshaping the global arms market, trend since February 2022. The war in Ukraine served as a dramatic inflection point for the global arms trade, fundamentally altering established patterns of supply and demand while accelerating pre-existing trends. While the overall volume of international arms transfers saw a marginal dip globally between the 2015-19 and 2020-24 periods, this figure masks seismic regional shifts, most notably a massive surge in arms imports into Europe. The most striking development has been Ukraine's transformation from a minimal arms importer to the world's largest recipient of major conventional weapons. Driven by the existential need to defend against Russian aggression, Ukraine accounted for 8.8% of all global major arms imports between 2020 and 2024, an almost 100-fold increase, plus 9,627%, compared to the preceding 5-year period. This unprecedented influx, primarily consisting of military aid from Western partners, placed Ukraine firmly at the top of the global import rankings, the only European nation in the top 10. This support highlights a concerted international effort to bolster Kiev's defense capabilities, supplying everything from basic munitions to sophisticated long-range systems. Beyond Ukraine, the war has ignited a continent-wide rearmament drive. European states collectively nearly doubled their major arms imports, plus 94%, between 2014-18 and 2019-23. Comparing the 2020-24 period to 2015-19 reveals an even starker increase of 155%. This surge reflects a fundamental reassessment of security threats following Russia's actions, prompting many nations, particularly NATO members, to significantly boost defense spending, modernize forces, replenish stocks depleted by aid donations, and enhance deterrence. This heightened demand, especially from Europe, has primarily benefited the world's leading arms exporters, the United States and France. US arms exports grew by 21% between 2015 to 19 and 2020 to 24, increasing its dominant global market share from 35% to 43%. European demand was the main driver, with US arms exports to the continent more than tripling, plus 233%, during this period. For the first time in 2 decades, Europe overtook the Middle East as the primary destination for US arms, receiving 35% of American exports and accounting for nearly 2/3, 64%, of arms imports by European NATO members. This reflects a strategic reliance on readily available, advanced US systems, particularly combat aircraft, reinforcing transatlantic ties and NATO interoperability. France also saw its arms exports climb by 11%, overtaking Russia to become the world's second-largest exporter with a 9.6% global share. French exports to Europe nearly tripled, plus 187%, fueled by aircraft deliveries and arms supplies to Ukraine. The concurrent rise of both US and French exports underscores the sheer scale of Europe's rearmament push. In stark contrast, Russia's long-standing position as a top-tier arms exporter has significantly eroded. Its arms exports plummeted by 64% between 2015 to 19 and 2020 to 24, causing its global market share to shrink from 21% to just 7.8%, falling from second to third place globally. This decline, already noticeable before February 2022, has been drastically accelerated by the war. Russia has been forced to prioritize supplying its own forces, while international sanctions have hampered production and financing, and diplomatic pressure has discouraged buyers. Pre-existing trends, such as India diversifying suppliers and China increasing domestic production, also contributed. With its client base shrinking, India, China, and Kazakhstan are key remaining buyers. Russia faces a profound structural challenge to its future as a major arms exporter. The shifting landscape clearly shows the US ascendancy, European surge, and Russian decline in the post-invasion arms market. The arsenal of conflict, supply lines to Ukraine and Russia. The brutal intensity and vast scale of the war in Ukraine are sustained by continuous, large-scale flows of military equipment and munitions. Understanding these supply lines, by identifying the providers, the types of equipment, and the mechanisms of transfer, is crucial for analyzing the conflict's dynamics and the underlying economic interests. Arming Ukraine. Ukraine's remarkable resilience against the Russian invasion has been critically dependent on military support from a broad coalition of international partners, largely coordinated through the 57-nation Ukraine Defense Contact Group, UDCG, which includes all 32 NATO members. At least 35 states have provided major arms systems since February 2022, with the European Union also playing a coordinating role. While support is widespread, the United States is the single largest national provider of military aid, supplying 45% of major arms transferred between 2020 and 2024, according to SIPRI data. Germany, 12%, and Poland, 11%, follow as the next largest suppliers of major systems. However, European nations collectively have committed vast resources, potentially exceeding US contributions in total aid, military, financial, humanitarian, by late 2024. US military assistance flows primarily through 3 mechanisms: Presidential Drawdown Authority, PDA, enabling rapid transfer from existing US stocks, crucial for speed early on, the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, USAI, funding procurement of new equipment directly from US manufacturers, longer timeline, builds new capacity, and foreign military financing, FMF, offering grants or loans for purchasing US equipment and training. A key aspect of this structure is that a substantial portion, estimated up to 90% of US aid funds, is spent domestically, translating directly into contracts for American defense companies and supporting tens of thousands of jobs. This intertwines foreign assistance with domestic industrial stimulus. This heavy reliance on external aid, however, creates a strategic vulnerability for Ukraine, subject to the political winds in donor nations, as evidenced by the damaging lapse in US funding between late 2023 and April 2024. Recognizing this, Ukraine is intensifying efforts to boost domestic production and secure more durable long-term security arrangements. Weapons Systems Overview. Ukraine. The types of military aid have evolved significantly. Initial packages focused on defensive, man-portable systems like Javelin anti-tank missiles and Stinger air defense systems. As the war became protracted, aid shifted towards heavier capabilities, vast quantities of artillery, M777 howitzers, M109 Paladins, Caesars, PZH-2000s, and millions of shells, multiple launch rocket systems like HIMARS, main battle tanks, Leopards, Abrams, Challengers, infantry fighting vehicles, Bradleys, Marders, increasingly sophisticated air defense systems, Patriot, NASAMS, IRIS-T, and a wide array of drones. Innovative solutions like Franken SAMs, Western missiles on Soviet launchers, emerged. Naval capabilities were enhanced with minehunters and successful domestic sea drones. Finally, F-16 combat aircraft and long-range cruise missiles, Storm Shadow, Scalp-PG, were approved, marking a significant step up the escalation ladder as Ukraine demonstrated proficiency and strategic need. Significance of refurbished equipment. A large portion of the equipment supplied, especially via USPDA, consists of second-hand or refurbished items. SIPRI indicates 71% of U.S. arms transfers to Ukraine, 2020-24, were second-hand for rapid delivery. This includes Soviet-era T-72 tanks refurbished in the Czech Republic with U.S.-Dutch funding. While speed is the main advantage, this equipment is often older, requires significant maintenance, burdening Ukraine's logistics, and contributes to a complex, diverse fleet. Furthermore, the valuation is contentious. Official U.S. figures often use higher replacement costs, while economic analyses argue the real value transferred is much lower, considering depreciation and the fact that much of it was surplus stock. This fuels debates about the true cost of aid and burden sharing. Arming Russia. Facing high battlefield consumption and Western sanctions, Russia has turned inward, prioritizing domestic production and relying on a small number of external suppliers, often skirting international norms. The primary driver of Russia's export decline is the need to supply its own war effort. Key external support comes from North Korea, reportedly supplying millions of artillery shells and ballistic missiles, violating UN sanctions, and Iran, providing thousands of Shahd attack drones. These pariah states offer Moscow essential munitions and low-cost asymmetric weapons its own industry struggles to produce at scale. China plays a crucial, different role by supplying vital dual-use goods like microelectronics and machine tools, helping Russia circumvent Western export controls. Russia is also reportedly trying to buy back Soviet-era equipment previously sold abroad. Russia's reliance on Soviet stockpiles, the immense strain of losses and sanctions has forced Moscow to heavily rely on reactivating decades-old military hardware from vast Soviet-era storage depots. An estimated 90% of tanks and armored vehicles sent to the front are refurbished older models, not new production. Despite possessing enormous initial stockpiles, attrition has been severe, with thousands of tanks and tens of thousands of other vehicles lost. While refurbishment plants work intensely on older T-72, T-80, and even obsolete T-62 and T-55, capacity to produce new advanced tanks like the T-90M is limited, perhaps 90 to 200 per year. Satellite imagery suggests usable stockpiles are dwindling rapidly. Only 40 to 50% remained in open storage by late 2024, with remaining vehicles often in poor condition. This forces Russia to pull equipment from distant regions and use ancient or improvised vehicles. This reliance on finite, aging stockpiles is a critical vulnerability. Analysts predict Russia could exhaust its usable tank and IFV reserves by late 2025 or 2026 if current loss rates persist, potentially forcing a major operational shift. The business of war, defense industry performance and expansion. The surge in global military spending, directly fueled by the war in Ukraine and the subsequent European rearmament drive, has translated into significant financial gains and expansion for defense companies in the United States and Europe. Financial impact on U.S. defense primes. Major U.S. contractors like Lockheed Martin, LMT, RTX Corporation, formerly Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, NOC, General Dynamics, GD, and Boeing, BA, have been primary beneficiaries. Their stock prices generally outperformed broader market indices after February 2022, with one study showing a 31% growth in market capitalization for major U.S. defense firms between February 2022 and March 2024. This financial upswing is directly tied to contracts funded by US aid to Ukraine and the need to replenish depleted US and allied stockpiles. Systems heavily used in Ukraine, such as Lockheed's HIMARS rockets, the Javelin anti-tank missile, a LMTE RTX venture, and RTX's Patriot and Stinger missiles, have seen major production orders. For example, Lockheed Martin reported $64.7 billion in defense revenue for 2024, signaling plans for rapid production increases across key programs. The aid mechanism, particularly replenishing stocks drawn down via PDA, creates a direct and sustained demand signal for manufacturers, ensuring continued revenue streams focused on conflict-relevant systems. European defense industry gains. European defense firms have experienced an even more dramatic surge. The perceived Russian threat and shifting strategic alignments have prompted massive, multi-year defense spending increases across the continent. This has led to soaring stock prices and record order backlogs for players like Germany's Rheinmetall, whose shares increased over 1,000% between February 2022 and early 2025, the UK's BAE Systems, plus 101% stock price jump E21 M24, Italy's Leonardo, plus 139% E21 M24, France's Thales, and Sweden's Saab. Order backlogs reached record highs. Rheinmetall, €55 billion end 2024, BAE Systems, €94 billion, and Dassault Aviation, €43 billion, indicating strong future demand. With European defense procurement projected to exceed €100 billion in 2025, plus 64% from 2023, this broad-based rearmament cycle suggests a potentially more durable growth trajectory for European firms compared to US counterparts more reliant on specific aid packages. Several European companies are also establishing production facilities within Ukraine. Ramping up production, the war starkly exposed the inadequacy of Western defense industrial bases, particularly for high-volume munitions. Artillery shell consumption vastly outstripped pre-war production. This has spurred massive efforts to revitalize capacity. Munitions. The US has invested heavily, $5.5 billion plus, to expand production, aiming to increase 155mm shell output from 14,000 per month pre-war to 100,000 per month by FY 2026. GMLRS, Javelin, and HIMARS production rates have also significantly increased. Europe is pursuing similar goals via initiatives like ASAP, €500 million fund, targeting 2 million shells a year capacity by end 2025. Major producers like Rheinmetall are building new factories. A Czech-led initiative sourced over 500,000 rounds globally for Ukraine. Drones, dubbed the First Drone War, the conflict highlights the transformative impact of unmanned systems. Ukraine has shown remarkable innovation, leveraging its tech sector to develop and deploy vast numbers of drones, aiming for millions of FPV drones annually. This battlefield reality drives global military interest, projected $57.8 billion drone market by 2030, and Western initiatives like the US Replicator program. Industrial base revitalization. Decades of underinvestment left Western defense industrial bases, DIB, ill-prepared. Both the US and Europe are implementing revitalization policies, reforming acquisition, increasing funding, encouraging competition, investing in surge capacity, and embracing new tech. Europe faces added challenges of fragmentation but pushes cooperative efforts, EDF, EDIP. Ukraine rapidly adapts its own industry, fostering innovation and attracting Western investment. Russia, despite running factories flat out, hits capacity limits and faces labor shortages. Success hinges on overcoming bureaucracy, ensuring stable funding, securing supply chains, especially critical components, developing skilled labor, and incentivizing industry investment. Economic ripples in supplier nations, the US case study. As the largest single provider of military aid to Ukraine, the United States confronts a complex domestic economic picture. Evaluating the impact requires balancing the stimulus to the defense sector against overall fiscal costs and potential macroeconomic side effects. Net economic impact. A significant portion of appropriated aid funds, estimated 86 to 90%, is spent domestically, primarily on contracts with U.S. defense manufacturers, stimulating production and supporting jobs. This effectively acts as a targeted fiscal boost for the defense industrial base. Furthermore, replacing older equipment drawn from stockpiles simultaneously modernizes the U.S. military's own inventory. Some argue the aid is a cost-effective strategic investment, degrading a key adversary's capabilities without deploying U.S. troops. However, the substantial sums involved, headline figures greater than $175 billion since 2022, represent a direct fiscal cost, requiring financing through taxes or borrowing, both imposing economic burdens. This raises questions of opportunity cost. Could these funds have been better used domestically or to counter other threats like China? While inflation concerns were raised, most analyses suggest the aid's impact on overall U.S. inflation was negligible. The net economic impact is complex, depending on financing methods and economic conditions, with the debate often shifting from pure economics to geopolitical strategy, where proponents argue strategic benefits outweigh costs. Debate over true valued cost. Compounding the analysis is the debate over the aid's actual value. Official figures often use replacement cost accounting for equipment provided via PDA. Critics argue this overstates the value, as much equipment is older, depreciated, and sometimes obsolete. One economic analysis estimated the real economic value of $31 billion, nominal, in PDA transfers was closer to $12.5 billion. This methodology suggests the total real value of all US aid delivered over 3 years might be less than half the official figures, representing a small fraction, around 0.25% of the annual US federal budget. This discrepancy significantly impacts perceptions of the aid scale and burden, fiscal implications and opportunity costs. Regardless of valuation, the sums involved raise opportunity cost questions. Critics point to unmet domestic needs or the need to prioritize resources against China. Proponents counter by framing the opportunity cost differently, arguing the cost of not aiding Ukraine, potentially leading to Russian victory, European destabilization, and vastly higher future U.S. defense spending, estimated $808 billion plus over 5 years, would be far greater. The real value debate further suggests the immediate diversion of valuable resources might be less than headlines imply. Parallel impacts on European economies. European nations, providing substantial aid, face similar economic trade-offs but with greater direct exposure. The surge in defense spending boosts their industries but strains budgets. Unlike the US, Europe suffered severe direct shocks like the energy crisis, disrupting Russian gas supplies, pushing inflation high and contributing to recessionary pressures. Europe also bore the brunt of the refugee crisis. This necessitates a more profound strategic and economic reorientation, sparking debates on relaxing EU fiscal rules for defense, joint borrowing, and the inherent trade-offs between defense and social spending. Economic catastrophe, the cost for Russia and Ukraine. While supplier nations navigate complex economic ripples, the direct participants, Ukraine and Russia, endure economic consequences of a catastrophic scale. Ukraine. The war has inflicted an unmitigated economic and humanitarian disaster. Ukraine's GDP plummeted by nearly 30% in 2022, the largest drop since independence. Despite some recovery fueled by aid, the economy remains shattered. Physical destruction is immense, with direct damage estimated at $176 billion by late 2024. The latest joint assessment, World Bank, UN, EU, Ukraine, pegs the total cost of reconstruction and recovery over the next decade at a staggering $524 billion, nearly 3 times Ukraine's projected 2024 GDP. This figure continues to climb, especially with a tax on energy infrastructure. Housing, $84 billion needed. Transport, $78 billion. Energy, $68 billion. Commerce industry, $64 billion. And agriculture, $55 billion, require massive investment. Landmines contaminate vast areas, suppressing agriculture and costing $11.2 billion in lost GDP annually. Tens of thousands have been killed or wounded, around 6 million are refugees, and 4 to 5.4 million are internally displaced. The poverty rate exploded, reversing 15 years of progress. Labor shortages, exacerbated by displacement, mobilization, casualties, and brain drain, are a primary concern impacting productivity. The sheer scale of collapse has made Ukraine structurally dependent on foreign aid, $3 to $4 billion per month needed for basic government functions, and military donations, a dependency likely to persist long term. Russia, despite avoiding immediate collapse, Russia's economy is under significant, growing strain. Reported GDP growth, 3.6% in 2023, 3.8 to 4.1% in 2024, is largely seen as an artificial boost from massive state spending on the military-industrial complex, a war economy masking deep weaknesses. Military and security spending consumes an estimated 40% of the federal budget and over 7.5% of GDP, fueling defense-related sectors but starving civilian ones. The economy is overheating, marked by persistent high inflation, official 9.5% end 2024, likely higher, despite punishingly high interest rates, 21%, that stifle the civilian economy. Severe labor shortages, 73% of firms report hiring difficulties, are driven by mobilization, emigration, absorption into defense industries, and reduced migrant flows. High industrial capacity utilization, 81%, suggests little room for expansion. Sanctions have inflicted significant damage, greater than 20,000 restrictions, the 70% banking assets sanctioned, greater than 1,000 foreign firms withdrawn. Energy revenues are reduced, and access to Western technology, especially crucial microelectronics, is severely limited, forcing reliance on costly illicit procurement networks via third countries. The combination of unsustainable military spending, inflation, labor constraints, technological isolation, and dwindling reserves points towards long-term economic stagnation, reminiscent of the late Soviet era, regardless of the military outcome. Weighing the scales, a cost-benefit analysis. A stark imbalance emerges when comparing the financial windfalls for the arms industry and supplier nations against the devastating economic toll on Ukraine and Russia, alongside broader global impacts. While the defense industry, particularly major US and European contractors, has clearly benefited financially through increased revenues, profits, and stock valuations driven by aid and rearmament, these gains are concentrated. For supplier nations like the US, this translates to domestic economic activity in a specific sector, sometimes framed strategically as degrading a rival cheaply. However, these benefits are dwarfed by monumental costs. For Ukraine, the economic price is catastrophic: a shattered GDP, immense destruction requiring a reconstruction effort, $524 billion plus, far exceeding its economic capacity, and profound human suffering. For Russia, costs include enormous military spending, potentially $211 billion plus, hundreds of billions in losses from sanctions and foregone growth, and a path towards long-term stagnation due to war economy distortions. Globally, the war has imposed significant costs through increased energy and food prices, supply chain disruptions, inflationary pressures hitting developing nations hardest, refugee support burdens, and diverted resources. From a purely economic perspective, the concentrated profits of the arms industry are vastly outweighed by widespread economic destruction, long-term damage, and negative global spillovers. The benefit side accrues largely to specific corporations and potentially strengthens supplier defense postures, while the cost side encompasses national devastation, immense future burdens, human tragedy, and global instability. The notion that war is profitable holds true only for a narrow segment. The overall economic ledger of this conflict is deeply, overwhelmingly negative. Long-term implications: geopolitics, economy, and security. The Russia-Ukraine war transcends regional conflict. It is actively reshaping the global geopolitical order, altering economic relationships, and setting new precedents for international security. Its long-term consequences promise to be profound. Geopolitical realignment. The war has starkly exposed and deepened global fractures, solidifying a divide between Western democracies and a bloc of revisionist powers: Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, challenging the existing order. While initial Western unity was strong, divergences persist regarding support levels and long-term strategy towards Russia. Many global South nations resist alignment, prioritizing national interests. Russia's pivot towards China and efforts to build influence elsewhere accelerate polarization. The conflict has damaged the credibility of international institutions and norms, particularly the UN Charter's principles on territorial integrity and non-proliferation, given Ukraine's history with nuclear disarmament and ineffective security assurances. Economic restructuring. Global energy markets have shifted dramatically, with Europe reducing reliance on Russian fossil fuels and the US emerging as a key LNG supplier. This benefits some energy producers while costing others. Supply chains remain disrupted, contributing to inflation and food security concerns. Russia faces long-term stagnation due to sanctions and war economy distortions. Ukraine confronts a multi-decade reconstruction, $524 billion plus, dependent on international aid. European nations embark on costly rearmament, forcing difficult fiscal choices. Security landscape transformation. The war signals the return of large-scale conventional warfare in Europe, driving NATO revitalization and massive defense spending increases. It highlights the critical importance of industrial capacity for munitions and drones. The effectiveness of drones, cyber, and information warfare offers key lessons. Profound questions arise about deterrence, escalation management, including nuclear risks, and the future of arms control. The war's outcome will heavily influence future global stability. A settlement rewarding aggression could set dangerous precedents, while one upholding sovereignty could reinforce norms. Europe's long-term security architecture remains deeply uncertain. The specter of proliferation, arms diversion risks. The massive influx of weapons into Ukraine, coupled with the inherent chaos of war, inevitably raises concerns about potential arms diversion to illicit markets. Historical precedents show large arms transfers can fuel black markets for years. Both Ukraine and its partners have implemented tracking measures, including parliamentary commissions, cooperation with defense attachés, and inventory reporting systems like NATO's Logfers, though full implementation takes time. Ukraine launched a unified register of weapons in 2023. Despite these efforts and official assurances that large-scale trafficking of Western arms out of Ukraine hasn't been verified, concerns persist. Russian disinformation frequently alleges widespread trafficking but lacks evidence. However, evidence of illicit internal arms activity exists, with authorities seizing caches, including captured Russian weapons, and arresting traffickers. Some recent seizures involving heavier weapons and military personnel suggest a potential shift towards more organized activity. The sheer volume of weapons distributed, including unrecovered arms given to civilians early on, creates a reservoir for potential diversion. Experts anticipate increased risks post-conflict during demobilization, potentially following established smuggling routes, with different weapon types appealing to various criminal or conflict markets. Sustained international cooperation and robust stockpile management are crucial to mitigate these long-term risks. An unbalanced ledger. The war between Russia and Ukraine has undeniably acted as a potent stimulant for segments of the global arms industry, confirming the grim reality that conflict generates demand for weaponry. Major defense contractors in the US and Europe have reaped substantial benefits, increased revenues, soaring profits, and enhanced market valuations, fueled by unprecedented military aid packages to Ukraine and a sweeping rearmament trend across Europe. For supplier nations, particularly the United States, this translates into tangible domestic economic activity and job creation within the defense sector, often politically framed as a shrewd strategic investment degrading a rival power without spilling American blood. Yet, this concentrated prosperity within the defense ecosystem stands in jarring contrast to the devastating economic consequences suffered by the primary belligerents and the significant collateral costs imposed upon the global economy. Ukraine faces an economic and humanitarian catastrophe of historic scale, its GDP shattered, critical infrastructure pulverized, millions forcibly displaced, poverty rampant, and national survival precariously dependent on continuous foreign life support. The staggering estimated reconstruction cost, exceeding $500 billion, underscores the multi-generational economic burden inflicted by the invasion. Russia, while projecting resilience through a state-controlled war economy, confronts severe and likely enduring economic damage. Crippling sanctions, technological isolation, unsustainable levels of military spending, persistent inflation, and critical labor shortages are eroding its productive capacity, condemning it to a likely future of protracted stagnation. Its reliance on dwindling Soviet stockpiles and pariah state suppliers further highlights the fundamental unsustainability of its war effort. Globally, the conflict has acted as an accelerant for inflation, disrupted vital supply chains, heightened food insecurity, and diverted precious resources towards military expenditure, disproportionately impacting the world's most vulnerable populations. When weighed on the scales of overall economic impact, the financial gains accruing to arms manufacturers appear almost negligible compared to this landscape of widespread hardship and destruction. Ultimately, the war presents a profoundly unbalanced ledger. While specific corporations and defense sectors emerge as clear financial winners, the comprehensive economic cost, borne most acutely by Ukraine and Russia, but also significantly by the wider world, is immense, pervasive, and set to linger for years, if not decades. This conflict is far more than a localized tragedy. It is a global economic event with enduring consequences, actively reshaping international trade, accelerating geopolitical shifts, and casting long shadows over future stability and security, not least through the persistent specter of arms proliferation. The perceived profit derived from the business of war is tragically overshadowed by the profound and devastating price paid in human suffering and economic devastation.
You've been listening to The Thought Collective, perspectives on the events shaping our world today. This podcast series is produced by UN Karmavir Chakra winner, Aditya Bosu. Join the community at adityabosu.com, where you'll find more insights and analysis, as well as the complete archive of our articles and podcasts. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, keep thinking differently.